My name is Jason Vinson. I am a wedding and documentary photographer based out of Northwest Arkansas. And today I have Natalie Keyssar. Did I say that right?
You did.
Natalie Keyssar with me. And we're going to be talking about storytelling. And I'm super excited for this talk because Natalie is kind of an expert. And so for people that don't know who you are, maybe give us like a quick little rundown of who you are, what you do, and all of that fun stuff.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Natalie Keyssar. I am a documentary photographer based out of Brooklyn, New York, and a Canon Explorer of Light. And yeah, my work is mostly about civil unrest, conflict, and migration. But I also really love stories about culture, fashion, and music, and I'm always kind of trying to find an intersection of those two seemingly very different themes. I work for what's left of print media international, pretty
Good.
much. And I was based between Venezuela and New York for many years, and now I'm based in Brooklyn, and I'm really focusing my work on Ukraine.
Awesome. So you travel to Ukraine quite often?
I do. I do a lot of assignment work over there. I've been working on a project about love stories in Ukraine for the last couple of years, and I'm now starting to bring that into my first documentary. So
Wow.
lots of, and then and then I also shoot a lot of local American news here and do a lot of stuff about style and culture to try to keep my brain refreshed and happy and not have it be all bad news all the time.
Okay, awesome. Very cool. So for everyone watching, so we're going to be doing 5 tips on storytelling. So essentially, Natalie emailed me a list of topics to choose from. And because they're all things that I'm interested in, I was like, what if we talk about all of them instead of just one? Because I'm kind of selfish that way. And then hopefully everyone else will enjoy it as well. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of read each tip and then we can just kind of talk about it for a little bit. That work? Okay. So the very first tip is how to choose a story. And you said this is an important one and can sometimes be very hard. So what are some tips for how to choose a story?
Um, yeah. So this is something I teach a lot of uh stuff about documentary photography. Whether it be about business or about the sort of process of storytelling and in different formats, from like formal schools to more informal mentoring sessions. And the sort of most obvious thing I feel like is something that gets overlooked a lot, which is how to figure out what you as a journalist, as a photographer, are going to dig into, right? And for me, I always try to tell my students that picking what you're going to work on should be kind of like falling in love. Like you should pick a topic that drives you crazy, that's really personal, that you can't stop thinking about. I see a lot of documentary photographers, especially like early career when they're kind of breaking in. They'll pick a story because they like think they're supposed to, or it looks like, either because it's the sort of trendy topic of the moment, or because it looks a lot like something their favorite photographer photographed a lot, or and like that's cool. But this is when you're working on a project, it's gonna suck the life out of you. It's gonna be like a very long-term commitment if you're doing it right. Most of my projects I end up spending years on, but even if you're spending a really intensive week on something, which almost definitely is not enough time, we're probably looking at least months, if not years. You need to be motivated when it goes really poorly, when it becomes impossible, when people aren't returning your phone calls, when all your plans go to hell. You need to stay caring about this. So whether it's something that makes you really angry or something that's really, really personal to you, and you have something that you have to say about it that only you can say, or you're just obsessed and it keeps you up at night, and it's so beautiful and visual and you just want to be there, whatever it is, picking that thing, it's going to, whatever you're photographing, then define who you are as, and it's also going to determine how you're spending a whole lot of your time. So
Every time.
I often see, like, younger photographers, kind of picking the topic that's in vogue for, that year or that season or whatever. And, and if you're not in love, you don't really care, then like when it, when you hit a rough patch, which every project is going to come with lots of those, then you might not have like the energy to sustain it and you know, to keep going. Which I think is another really important part of working on documentary projects. It's not just going and taking pictures of the thing. That's not like anybody can go and like photograph a group of people or a situation one time. But if you're really going to make an in-depth project and you're really going to make work with something to say, then that's a process of photographing over and over and over again, and taking your obvious pictures and taking all the pictures you can think of, and then throwing them all away because that was just the beginning, and starting to think about like what's the next level, how to dig a little bit deeper. So yeah, picking.
So when you're choosing a story, do you find, because obviously you have to go like out on assignments and stuff like that. So how often do you find yourself choosing a story rather than like finding a story in the field?
I I mean, for me personally, and I think that everybody's process on this stuff is different, but I think most of my work and most of my personal projects are subjects that I'm interested in, that I'm reading about, or that, a lot of stuff comes to me through friends of friends and through my community. I just did a project that I pitched about artists in Ukraine it's looking at sort of graffiti writers and dancers and tattoo artists and musicians and all these people that are either fighting or using their art to fight for the war effort. These are literally all just friends of friends. It's just my community introducing me to people and being like, whoa, there's really something here that I'd like to like give some shine to. Or I'll read about something and there's like a footnote, or there's a lot of times I'll be reading a news article about something that I'm interested in, and there's like a throwaway line about something else that's happening. During COVID, I did a project about elderly incarcerated people and the situation, what it was like to be in prison, which is a very high risk population and very old. The US has one of the largest aging prison populations in the world. And that was like a footnote in something just about like high risk statistics. And I turned it into a year-long project that I ended up publishing with Rolling Stone. So like, yeah, for me, it's something that like sort of like catches my interest, and then I pitch a lot of the time. Every once in a while I get sent out on an assignment and I'm like, oh, I'm going to finish this assignment and then I'm going to stay here for years and really get involved in this. But I feel like pitching is also, a lot of photojournalists and documentary photographers are kind of sitting around waiting by the phone a lot, which, if anybody's ever waited for a phone call for any reason, it's like, it sucks. Just about agency. So I feel like, another thing we talk about, especially in me and Daniella's workshops, which we're going to talk about a lot today, is like pitching is a really good way to show people what you're interested in, and sort of, for lack of a less nauseating word, create a brand for yourself. So the more that I'm creating projects that are about what I'm into, the more it helps potential clients and funders understand that like that's my zone, that's my niche. And so then I start to get more assignments that are in the same sort of area of expertise, if that makes sense. But yeah, projects come from everywhere. I mean, like my first big project that was about the dance hall scene in Brooklyn, I like realized I wanted to do it because I was listening to Little Kim and she has a lyric about dance hall queens. And that ended up like being a 3-year project and a lifetime friendship and publishing in Time magazine. So you never know.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So getting started, how to make contact, how to prepare, how to approach a new community. So obviously this is very relevant. You just talked about, a lot of your stories and stuff like that come from your community, or ideas that you have. So talk a little bit about getting started and where to kind of like start building that community and making contact with people that you might be interested in.
So this is a huge one, right? It's a big topic of conversation ethically and in terms of like process in the documentary photography community. It's something that my teaching partner, Daniella Zaltzman, and I talk about all the time between ourselves and with our students and our workshops, because it's really hard. Like coming in as a photographer, every photographer listening is going to relate to this. Like walking into a new space, going up to people. The hardest thing I think in the whole job is like walking up to somebody and being like, "Hi, can I take your picture?" I don't know. Maybe,
Can I follow you around for 3 years?
yeah. Take your picture. How about can I just can I watch you sleep? I don't mean to be creepy. It's just I think it would be a really beautiful image, but like I don't mean to be scary. Oops, so like that. And for me, it's honestly, it has of course gotten easier over the course of my career, but I still like when I'm driving around a new place or walking around somewhere where I need to be, whether I'm on assignment or working on a personal project and I need to photograph strangers, I still have to have like a talk with myself where I'm like, young lady, you will stop this car if you see a photograph. You will get out and you will ask to take a photo because I have to like fight with the part of me. It's like, I don't want to bother them. They're going to yell at me. I don't want to, So, I mean, that's one example, but making, when you're thinking like, okay, I'd like to work with X community and I need to contact them, breaking in is huge. Um, and those first steps are really important in terms of doing that respectfully, giving people lots of information, letting them know exactly who you are, where you're coming from, what the possible publication outcomes of what you're making could be, what you don't know yet, because maybe you're making a project and you have no idea where it's going to end up, but you need to communicate that, how to I think something we talk about a lot in our workshops is that, genuine interest goes a long way. Just, sometimes it can seem so crazy to go up to somebody and say, hey, can I hang out? We take, a couple thousand bajillion frames of you. But like just letting people know that what you think they're doing is cool or admirable or you respect their struggle. So I think that just kind of going over, like, I think it's really, really, there's a lot of different strategies for how to like make contact with a new community or introduce yourself as a photographer, even within your own community, because it is kind of inherently awkward until people get used to it. Um, and then I think there's a lot of, I really believe in this. And again, it's something that we talk about a lot in the workshops, like doing that ethically is also the best way to do it. That I think that like the same things that I believe are correct in terms of that procedure ethically are the same things that are going to set you up to work really well with the community in the long term and be the best for making intimate, beautiful, fresh, creative work. Right. So like, there's a lot of important conversation in the industry right now about what it means to come in as an outsider and photograph a community that's not your own. And whether people even should do that, which I think is like, an ongoing and important conversation. I work a lot as an outsider. My great grandparents are Ukrainian, but I'm super American. I was working in Venezuela for years and years and years. I'm absolutely not Venezuelan, so like figuring out, for me, it's all about being super humble, approaching people, really with an attitude of like, hey, I'd like to learn from you. I'd essentially like you to be my teacher and I'd like to photograph that process and really bringing people in as collaborators in your project. I think this is really fundamental and I think it's quite different from some older attitude towards photography of not coming in being like, I'm the photographer and I'm going to author a story about you and I'm going to tell you what your story is and translate that to the world and be the voice of the voiceless. Yeah, like a lot of tropes that I really don't like. But to come in and say, like, can we get down? Can we work together? Can we like make images that you feel are representative of you? And can you teach me about what those are? And that both, I think, creates like a really, really important, empowered, equal representation framework between photographer and person being photographed and sets you up to have like a great long-term relationship with the people you're working with.
So when you're approaching people, you don't need to get any sort of like releases or anything like that for journalistic stories, do you?
No, I'm really against them. I'm like hearing my partner Daniella like scream. We hate releases. I sometimes have to release people for commercial work or for publications that of some kind of sort of commercial deal or whatever, people need to protect their legal interests. I get it. But I think releases are essentially pretty extractive documents, and so for personal work, for documentary work, for journalistic work, there's no need because that's not a commercial use, so it doesn't require somebody to sign away all rights to their image. Um, and I don't ever want to do that. I really believe in when I'm working with people that I actually want like continuous informed consent to use that imagery. That means that not only am I asking your permission to photograph you, not only am I asking, and not just like, we see this a lot when you're working with like some kind of vulnerable or marginalized population, right? I work a lot with undocumented people in the U.S., for example. And when I approach somebody who's undocumented, I'm a white American photographer with a big old expensive camera and a press badge, and I'm approaching them at, a shelter or a line to cross a border or some other situation, like some kind of NGO where they're maybe receiving help, and if I come up to you and I'm like, hey, can I take your picture? Somebody in that situation might just be sitting there being like, like, I don't want to get deported. Are they not going to help me at this NGO if I say no, whatever? So like, first of all, I think it's really, really important when you're getting that permission that you're explaining who you are, that you're, I do a lot of explaining, like, you can say no to this. Like you can tell me to absolutely F right off. And that's completely fine. And I support you. Let's make sure this is a good idea for you first. But really getting that like good consent from the jump and not just having somebody say yes because they're afraid to say no and knowing the difference. And then also making sure that you're in touch with that person so that if something changes in their life and suddenly that photograph becomes problematic for them, you're available to be contacted and and you can say like, okay, I published this story in the New York Times. Now they want to run it in, I don't know, El País, some Spanish. Is it going to change this in a Spanish language for you? Are you okay with a different publication? They want to put it in a museum. Are you cool with your photo being in a museum? Like, you really want to maintain that contact. And if I have a release, then I'm not legally then I owe you nothing, right? If I don't have a release, then we really need to be having that conversation every time. And that's kind of what I'm going for.
Cool. Let's move on to the next one. So visual style, how to match form to function in visual storytelling. What does that even mean?
Okay, so this is something that has been really important to me in my own career. And I don't know. Obviously, like, a lot of people think that talk about photojournalism as though it's some kind of like great public service. Wish it was. I don't know if I really believe that that's true. I do think that there's like a lot of important work in documenting living history, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is that we like get into this because we like light and color, right? Like I definitely do consider myself an artist. I'm not saying like a very good one, but like I love imagery and I love light. I love playing with flash. I love like really digging into the color palette and post and thinking about how different light, color, composition, style treatments change the way you perceive a situation, right? A lot of very, very traditional photojournalism, some of which I love, but like, there's a lot of stuff that is dark and sad and like, sometimes I feel like almost makes like people in difficult situations, it like makes their situation look even more difficult. And that's the message. And sometimes that's exactly the right message, right? Or a very, very important perspective on, if you're shooting war, famine, all these situations. It's an ongoing since forever debate about whether that should be pretty or not. And like my photos lean towards pretty. And there's a very valid critique of that, which is that it's disgusting to make beautiful images of terrible situations. And I'm like, honestly, no, I don't disagree with that. However, I also really believe in making like empowered images of the beautiful people that are struggling even in these situations, right? And so for me, I don't want to make an image that's reductive, that sort of points a finger and says how terrible it is. I feel like even in terrible situations, there's so much beauty and so much that I admire in the people that I encounter in those situations. And that's what I'm shooting for. So I'm really working with a bright color palette and lighting treatment that's pointing in that direction. Thinking a lot about especially how marginalized and underrepresented people are usually represented with like little lighting, little care for their appearance. Whereas, we look at like commercial photography, representation of models, people in power, where if there ever images made of these people, there's a team of 20 people making sure they look perfect. And I'm kind of like, how can we flip those aesthetic languages in the service of that, making images that look more like the respect that I want to show. So, and that's just an example of, I guess, how I'm thinking about it in my own work. But something that I really like to do in terms of mentorship is teaching, is to really start to tease out, the semiotics of light, and of color, and of how we treat people, of staging things versus not staging things, of like how clean an image versus how complex, so that even as a documentary photographer, where traditionally we're sort of taught, like, the idea is that you just shoot what's in front of you, right? But like, there is no shooting just what's in front of you, because you're making, this, every photographer knows this, where you're standing, how tight you're shooting, how wide you're shooting. If you're lighting it, you're completely changing everybody's perception of that scene, depending on how you shoot it. And so I think it's really important to make clear, informed decisions about what all of that means about representation. And then the fun part is that once you sort of start going back and forth with that language, where you have sort of your own personal style developing, and you're also respectfully tailoring that style to the situation you're working in, because we don't want to be like an Instagram filter or just using other people's lives to like paste our style over. There's situations, for example, where I won't shoot with flash because I don't think it's respectful to be popping flash in people's faces in certain moments of their lives. There's other ones where I will, but once you sort of got those elements working, I think it's really important in terms of the kinds of story, how it affects like the way the story you're telling is perceived. And it's also really important from a sort of personal brand perspective as a photographer. A lot of documentary photographers, I think, early on and in certain schools are encouraged to be very flat, like not really have a style. And that certainly makes you employable for certain publications, but there's other ones, there's lots of opportunities out there that are looking for a strong aesthetic language, and like knowing that like this photographer is having this type of picture and it's relatively consistent and I know what I'm going to get. And that opens up a lot of business opportunities. And I think that that's something that can be really, really useful from a marketing perspective in your career as well.
Would you say that do you have like an overall style that you try to be consistent with for your like entire body of work, or do you try and tailor that to the story or to what you're working on?
Both. I think that at this point, it's something that's grown over the course of my career. But I have some instincts that I don't like, that are let's for just 1 second while I turn off the stove. I think I just one. Don't worry, crisis averted. Nothing is on fire. Okay. So in terms of having my own aesthetic versus tailoring it to the shoots that I'm working on, yeah, I mean it is really both. I definitely have a style, and I've always tried to, like, for my whole career I've tried to lean into like, there's a certain, I feel like developing your style as a photographer is a lot about leaning into the instincts you have that seem weird or different, that you don't really know where they're coming from, right? A lot of people start out emulating a style and trying to make pictures that look like their heroes, and that's a cool way to learn different aesthetic languages. But ultimately, like, having your own personal style is going to be some kind of fusion of those influences, plus really learning to to listen to your own inner voice about what you love personally, which means it might not be the crowd pleaser image. In fact, it often won't be, right? It's like, no, like my favorite image from this day is this weird detail that doesn't even show what I was sent to shoot, but I think it's like so powerful, and I really love the way the light is hitting that flower in the corner. And I know it was a politics shoot, but that's not the point, right? I think it requires courage to have style, like in any art form, because you sort of depart from the safety of what you're supposed to do into something that's a little bit new and unique. Um, and so in my case, like I've definitely like leaned into, I use a lot of light even in like very fast paced documentary settings, which, helps me control the aesthetics that I'm working with a little bit. I like things bright. I like things colorful. I like beauty, even in the midst of the most ugly situations. I'm very, very attracted to photographing like other young women. I always have been. I always find I make friends and I find muses, and I'm really, really inspired by like the situation of other young women no matter where I'm at. And those tend to be sort of the people that I focus on no matter what. So yeah, so I do think I have a visual style. I hope so. But then I also think it's really important to always remember that when you're photographing real people's lives, and especially a lot of times the worst days in other people's lives, that you're not prioritizing your style over their comfort or how to tell their story or what's appropriate, and this is something that, anybody that's worked in a photojournalism setting has seen a scrum of jerk photographers shoving each other out of the picture, arguing loudly at a funeral or in a hospital or outside of, we're in a lot of situations where you should be very quiet and not attracting attention to yourself and incredibly gentle and respectful. And that means getting really, really close and getting the decisive moment and being right in somebody's face when they're starting to cry. Sometimes it's possible. And sometimes it's absolutely inappropriate and extractive and disgusting. And, that's where I think for the first year of the full scale invasion of Ukraine, I shoot flash on almost everything. I love flash. I have so much fun with it. It's a huge part of my visual style. That thing went away. I was in a country full of heartbreak with also lots of security concerns, and like I didn't touch my light because it felt profoundly inappropriate and disrespectful. Over the last year or so, as I've gotten to photograph some stories where, that are more about art and culture, or with people that I have a long-term relationship with that we're comfortable, and, my light started to come back into those situations sometimes, but it's measured, right? If yesterday I was on an assignment where I was photographing somebody that's severely ill. Again, like my aesthetic I would have preferred to be bouncing the flash all over that room because the light sucked, but like flash stayed in bed, so those are, and I think there's hopefully also you have a personal style that's like flexible enough. But I have seen, I do think that fundamentally, again, like everything with documentary photography is ethics first and then style later. And that means you really need to be thinking about like, do you need a close up of this, even if it's going to stress somebody out on the worst day of their life? Probably
Right. So we have two more tips, but before we jump into them, I think now might be a good time to talk about your workshop that you have coming up. So you have an in-person workshop coming up in New Orleans, and then you also have, I think, like a online mini version of that as well. So can you give us a little hint and preview of what that looks like?
Yeah, no, thank you. So, okay. This is, I mean, basically I'm almost like in so much, the way I think about all of my work is so influenced by these workshops. Since pandemic, I've been teaching workshops on documentary photography, storytelling ethics, and the business of photojournalism with my partner, Daniella. I hope all of y'all know who she is because she's incredible, but she's a just fantastic documentary photographer and educator. She's the founder of Women Photograph. She's a professor of photojournalism at Tulane University, longtime regular contributor to National Geographic, and like we've been best friends and I love her very much. And we came up together in the photojournalism world, and during pandemic, we were going crazy on Zoom along with everybody else, and we started teaching these Zoom workshops about all of the, about all of the issues that we mentioned, and really with an eye towards during pandemic, it became so clear like how difficult freelancing is in this business, and also how important representation and ethics and creating a sort of progressive model, like a new model of documentary storytelling for like the world that we're living in. How much we need to be having these conversations and thinking about the next generations of photographers and sort of creating like a new rubric around how to do this, both like economically and creatively and professionally. And so we started doing these Zoom workshops, which were really successful, and they've been really cool because people come from all over the world on Zoom. We've got so many students that come and stay up all night and like, take our classes from the other side of the world, and like all over the global South. Because it's Women Photograph, because Daniella is the founder of Women Photograph, and I've worked with them extensively. We've got a lot of women, but we this is not women's only thing. Dudes are welcome. People from everywhere are welcome. So last year we did our first in-person workshop, which is really exciting. It was like kind of the culmination of a dream for us in New Orleans, where Daniella lived, where Daniella lives. And this year, October 3rd through 6th, we're doing our second annual NDA in-person workshop. We call it NDA because it's, it's a cute play on the non-disclosure agreement, and it's our initials. But we've got this workshop going. It's 4 days of I think we're basically trying to teach everything we know about photojournalism and the business in 4 days, which is a really, really ambitious, kind of crazy thing to do. But we're teaching grant writing, competition entries. We've got portfolio reviews that are part of the workshop, where we have reviewers coming in from amazing publications and institutions checking out your work. We're also teaching you how to edit for that. We're going over the business, how to make this work economically, the nuts and bolts of pitching stories, how to get assignments, what the hell to do once you get that assignment, and like best practices for that. Lots more. And then we're also, over the course of the workshop, giving each student an assignment within the New Orleans community that they're shooting, and we're using that as like a sort of teaching opportunity and giving them a chance to actually be photographing and we're reviewing work. And then we create a final show at our incredible partner and location, Paper Machine, which is a print shop and gallery in New Orleans. So there's a final exhibition at the end of the workshop. We have a little party. It's really cute. And yeah, it's a great time. I mean, last year was super moving, and we had such an incredible first cohort, and it was really an incredible long weekend. This year, we have sponsorship from Catchlight, which is an incredible photojournalism and documentary photography support institution. And they have sponsored 15 scholarships. 10 scholarships will cover 75% of tuition, and 5 will cover 50% of tuition. So there's a lot of financial aid available. That's really addressing one of the key issues for us, which is we've traditionally done 1 scholarship spot for every 5 full paid tuition spots in both our online and in-person workshops. And this is giving us an opportunity to have a whole lot more people come who need help attending.
Very cool. Awesome. Okay, cool. So for everyone that's interested in checking that out, definitely check the links in the description, because I'll drop those, and there's all the details about how to sign up, how to apply for scholarships, and all that fun stuff. So let's jump into topic number 4, which is new media and collaborative approaches, Danny's specialty. which I'm sad we had to reschedule because that made it so that she couldn't actually be here for this call, but I'm
Me
sure you could talk to
too.
it.
I know this. So this is a section that something that I think is really important, and I've also learned a lot from Daniela because it's a core of her practice. Daniela's done incredible committed work over the years, looking at the boarding schools that were often essentially torture institution for Native populations in the U.S. That separated kids from their family and violated all of their human rights. And Daniela has been doing deep work on this for over a decade. She's published books. She's created teaching materials. She's published widely in Nat Geo about this. And she's really cultivated this incredible collaborative practice where she's involved so many artists, intellectuals, teachers, survivors into her process, into the written words, into the, multimedia explorations of different ways of image making to tell these stories. So y'all should all check out that project. It's called Sense of Your Identity. And that's like, I think one of our sort of fundamental teaching models in terms of how to develop ethical collaborative practices around documentary photography that both from a sort of how we want to do this work standpoint brings in the community and makes it something that you're doing together. So you're not just coming in as an outsider being like, I'm going to decide the style and visual approach to your story. One, you're going to involve artists from that community and make it a conversation. Two, it makes everything look really cool and fresh and different because you're not just doing the same old thing, right? And so I feel like that's like something that is so important to us in terms of how we teach these workshops and do our own personal work, is that this idea of like the lone photographer coming in and having the vision is cool and cute and everything. And I work in that way often, especially on assignment and stuff. But like when possible, really sitting down with the people you're photographing and finding out if they have, if they're artists, if they're dancers, if they're musicians, can you make something together? Can you, is somebody really good at embroidery, which is something that Danny's done in the past? Can you like stitch into the photographs? Is there a painter that you want to collaborate with and have them painting your photographs? What can you, are y'all going to make a movie together? Like, what's the deal? What are the things that you can do that not only will incorporate multiple voices and give a wider perspective on the story you're trying to tell, but also end up making like way cooler art and visuals, which we like.
That's interesting. Yeah, so you're essentially telling people's story and then trying to incorporate their types of interests into the final product. Or the final story.
There's just like, if you're coming in as a documentary photographer to a community asking questions as opposed to like sort of being like, this is what I want to make, right? Like this, we talk about this all the time in our workshops, and I like can't repeat it enough. Like, you want to come in with an open mind, you want to come in with a student's mind, right? Like, not stand over there, I'm going to take your picture and write this caption about how like this terrible thing happened to this person. Okay, like, where's my world press, right? I don't really like that way of working. Sometimes that's all you have time for. Sometimes you're on assignment and that's like what you have to do, and you just want to do that in the most, respectful, beautiful way possible. But if you have time, especially if you're working on your own body of work or you have like a longer time to work on something, really finding out who people are and, what traditional forms of representation exist in their community, what non-traditional forms of representation exist in their community. How do they want to be seen? How do they really not want to be seen? What could you do to level things up? And, and even if it's not collaborative, because sometimes you're documenting people and they're totally interested in you telling their story, but they're not really interested in, being a partner in the artistic process. But like, figuring out what kind of language of symbolism or additional elements beyond just photography, whether it be writing or music or, using archive. Do they have amazing, old photographs or other types of visual elements that you could be using? anything you add to that is going to make it way more interesting, right? As soon as you get out of the mindset of sort of being obsessed of like me, my photographs, and open it up to what's the best way to visually tell the story, you're going to end up making much more unique work that stands out a whole lot more and probably tells a lot more of that story.
I find myself doing. I've noticed that that holds true just on the level of just knowing who your subject is and having like a deeper connection. Anytime I shoot a wedding for, family or friends and stuff like that, like it always just goes smoothly because you know them, right? You're more involved. You have a personal connection to them.
Totally. And it's like I'm sure you're good at this, like, it's like a part of your skills as a wedding photographer that I feel like people, probably don't realize unless you do it, is once you start to know what those important values or like, if you're shooting like your friend's wedding, then like, okay, they would really hate this and they're not going to ask me for this, but I know they'll be so happy if I just like drag them over and make them do this just for 5 minutes. They're going to be thrilled for the rest of their life. Like, then you know how to ask those questions to total strangers, right? Then you sort of you get better at predicting. And that's like so much of the job beyond just being good at, clicking the shutter.
Sure. Just knowing like this person values this relative of theirs. So I know when they come in contact, like it's going to be a special moment and I want to make sure that I'm ready for that.
Totally. Which is so hard, man. I just cannot express enough how much respect I have for wedding photographers. I have shot weddings before and they're so much harder than like so much of the hard news stuff I do. I swear. It's like the most demanding, exacting, nerve-wracking way to do photography. And it's obviously
They're definitely not for everybody, which neither is conflict photography either. But although some brides mobs can be pretty conflicting.
I'm saying I don't want to make like comparisons that I will regret saying on the record, but y'all's job is hard.
On that note, last tip. Let's talk a little bit about ethics and how to protect the community you're working as a documentary storyteller. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but let's dive a little deeper.
So this is like a perfect example of how, and this is something again that we harp on in the workshops, and that I'm constantly thinking about in the field, because I do think, and some people in the documentary photography community don't like this, and I think other people very much agree with me. But like the photography and the history of documentary photography is a pretty colonial, pretty extractive process. Is a lot of, relatively privileged white folks who could afford cameras going to communities and doing some kind of like essentially like safari type process where they're saying, "Ooh, look at me, I went and did this thing." And maybe they're making incredible work. And I'm including myself. I think that some of my earlier work, was not considering these things the way I should have. But it's, there's a lot of taking from people in the history of documentary photography. And I think that, my generation and the generations that are coming after, and every generation of photographers sort of wrestled with how to do this correctly, because ultimately I don't think that like anybody, from the very beginning on down got into this for bad reasons, right? Everybody's trying to do good work out here, but we have to sort of constantly be thinking about how to do it better and how to rewrite the sort of accepted ethical conventions of our work. And, we talk about this all the time in the workshop, that increasingly, the way that we're thinking about this is just really making a collaboration. And that goes outside of the sort of traditional objective, separate photographer thing that I think most people understand as how to do photojournalism correctly, or how they're taught to do photojournalism correctly. A lot of photography schools or sort of codes of ethics for publications are sort of like, you're not here to make friends. Don't blurry the boundary. You are objective. Just shoot what you see. And I don't disagree with trying to be objective, except that I don't think anyone is objective about literally anything. So I think you sort of have to accept your position and then be honest anyways. Um, and I think that just shooting what you see is so complicated because your vision is subjective and we know that, right? So, in terms of ethical representation and in terms of doing this work truthfully, you know, we talk a lot about, first of all, recognizing if you have a bias or if you are so much outside of a community that you are very ignorant, right? Because, like, it's one thing to come in as an outside, like, of course, it's easier to not be quote unquote biased if you're an outsider of a community, but like, another way to say that is you don't care and you totally have no idea what's going on. So you have no context and your photos are ignorant. And I don't think that's such a great thing either. I think that if you're, we as documentary photographers have a responsibility to learn enough about whatever we're photographing to make sure that our work does no harm and is an accurate representation of what we're seeing. And that goes far beyond just sort of popping up and clicking and not talking to anybody, right? Um, I mean, in our workshops, we devote, a couple hour block to discussing this deeply. Plus, we're talking about it the entire weekend. It comes up in every section, as you've like already seen. But I think in short, it's like really starting to think about your responsibility as a photographer photographing other people's lives. And that means there is a lot of potential for this work to hurt people, depending on what kind of subjects you're photographing. But once you make somebody's life public, that's a huge responsibility, especially if you're dealing with delicate subject matter. So, if you're spending time with somebody when they're incredibly psychologically vulnerable, ethical representation is about having psychological training, knowing how, knowing what to do, what to say, what not to do, what not to say, understanding how to adapt that to every situation because it's going to change in every situation. Understanding, when you need to put your camera down and just be there with somebody, understanding when it's time for you to give somebody some space and go away, when maybe you actually need to try to help somebody rather than photographing them, because I believe a lot of the situations we're in, I think there's actually like a lot of situations where you can try to help. There's also situations where it's not going to do any good. And the best possible thing you can do is document something terrible and try to get through it. Right. Um, you know, we talk a lot also about protecting the communities that you're photographing. When somebody lets you take their picture, that's giving you a ton of trust. And I think that, again, comes with a huge responsibility. That means making sure you again, to use the example of undocumented people, because I think it's a relatively simple model. If you photograph an undocumented person and they say, yes, it's okay with me, I don't think this photograph is going to get me deported. Okay, cool. Like, have a conversation with them. Okay, why? Okay, because I have temporary protected status in the U.S. And so, they're not deporting Salvadorans next period of years. Oh, well, that just changed. Okay, how does that change these photographs? Like, can you remember where these people are and what their legal situation is? Or if you're photographing protesters, right? You're photographing protesters who are participating in civil disobedience. Oh, you just made like a really, really sexy photo of that guy smashing a cop car. There's like glass flying everywhere and there's fire and it's iconic and you might win an award. Are you going to put him in jail? Or are you cool with that? I personally am not cool with making images that are going to put anybody in jail anywhere. So like that comes with a lot of responsibilities. That means if I click that shutter, I need to be ready to not file super dramatic images that I think are going to endanger people. Right. And like, I need to be willing to have that conversation with my editors, understand their ethical concerns and also the policies of anybody who might be employing you. I mean, this stuff is sticky, right? Like I'm going on a rambling run on about all of the different considerations that we encounter as photojournalists. And so, again, it's something that we really go deep on in our workshops. And the idea isn't to give you, it would be easier. And I think that sometimes there's like a sort of old set of rules that just tries to say kind of like, okay, like stay objective, shoot the truth. And, then you're clean. Then you've done this work ethically. And I think actually like the situations we work in are so messy that really needing to constantly analyze the potential effects and outcomes of the images you're making and where they could go, and constantly change how you're handling them and really take responsibility for every potential fallout from those images. And that requires a lot of tools and a lot of consideration. That's something that we talk about a lot in that workshop, is trying to give you like that toolbox and that way of thinking about
It's important to think about all the different things that you can run into as you're trying to learn the craft, because you want to be prepared, right? You don't want to
it.
have to try and learn this on the fly. When it comes to things like getting sent on assignment, or working with publications and stuff like that, how much of this like ethics conversation is had between you and the publications prior to going out or after coming back with the material?
I mean, it really depends. It really depends on the situation, right? And I think that also, like, for me, working on a personal project comes with like a different playbook a little bit than working with, if I'm on assignment for a publication. Like, if I'm working for myself, then I'm going to do stuff my way, which a lot of times is going to be the hard way. It's going to be long and slow and lots of like conversations and checking in with people and, involving them in decision making. If I'm on assignment, if I'm covering a breaking news situation, let's say I'm covering a protest for like a major American newspaper, then first of all, they need me to make the news pictures. They need me to shoot what I see. They need me to file them fast. And realistically, once I file them, I'm not going to have a lot of control over what's said about them or where they go, right? That's like part of my contract and that's part of my job. So, first of all, that means that like rather than being in a situation where I'm like getting everybody's phone number and okay, we're going to talk about this and can I come work with you long term? It might be me sort of like standing up on a bench and screaming out to a crowd like, "Hi, I'm with the X big newspaper or magazine. If you don't want to be photographed today, or if you're worried about your face being shown, just, flip me
Stay away
off
from me.
or turn your back or let me know. I will respect you." But like, I'm identifying myself. I'm here. I want you to know where I'm from and where these pictures are going and giving you an opportunity. We're in public, so legally I can do whatever I want, but I'm trying to, respect everybody, right? So like, in that way also I'm fulfilling my obligations to the publication that I'm working for, which like maybe is not so interested in me like hand wringing about the, colonial legacy of photography. They need they need the damn pictures of the thing that it's right. So like, there's different ways to go about it depending on the situation and how delicate it is. Now it comes up all the time that either I'm going into a situation that I know is going to be really complicated, and in that case, I might call my editor, or my editor might call me. If I'm working with people that are really great at their jobs and also really trying so hard to do a good job on these complicated ethical issues, and we'll break it down and be like, okay, what could we run into? Like, are we worried about getting people arrested or deported? We don't want to do any harm. Are we going to try to photograph this situation anonymously so that that's not even an issue? Or, are we working with I've worked with people that are suffering from addiction, for example. Okay, how are we going to do informed consent when everybody's high out of their minds, right? Like, what does that mean? Okay, there isn't informed consent when you're high out of your mind. So like, what do you know, trying to sort of figure out a visual approach. Sometimes it's like, okay, we're going to be really, really creative and make sure that all of this is anonymous and we're not revealing any identities that could be damaged by these photos. Or, okay, we're really going to work hard to find people that are willing to take the risks of having their faces in these images, whatever the case may be. So I usually go in, coordinating if I'm worried about getting into any kind of ethical or safety conundrum, then I'm going to have a long conversation with my editor beforehand and be like, these are the potential trouble spots I'm seeing. What are the ones that you're seeing? How do we like figure this out and have a pretty good plan of how to make something good that fulfills our needs together? And then sometimes still you get into the field and you're like, okay, and then this is where it's really important to be working with people that you trust and respect and who trust and respect you. And thankfully that describes pretty much all of the clients that I work with. And sometimes I get into the field and, if something happens and I photograph something, that maybe is really dramatic, but also maybe could put somebody in jeopardy. And, I'm gonna call my editor and be like, look, this is what we've got. And like, I'm on assignment for you. So here's, this is what I think is safe. This is what I think is unsafe. This is what I'm worried about. These are the potential consequences. And, you know, almost every time I've had that conversation, I think every time I've had that conversation with maybe one or two very upsetting exceptions, everybody involved in that process, top to bottom, wants to do the right thing and would never want to hurt somebody, right? So, like, it becomes, okay, what's safe, what's not? Oh, we love this photograph. We think it could be a prize winning photograph. We think it could be whatever, but it's not, but it's going to have bad consequences for somebody. So it goes in the vault. That's it, right? Every once in a while, your job is, there's also like different situations, right? If you're photographing somebody who's corrupt or somebody who's violating human rights, if you're photographing the police beating somebody within an inch of their life, for example, is that potentially consequential? Yeah. Are you gonna not publish it because of that? No. You know what I'm saying? So there's different kinds of situations, but I think it's all about just like opening up these conversations with the people that you trust and when you're on assignment, making sure you're anticipating potential problems and then also giving your editors all the information afterward. This is what I saw. This is what I got. This is what I'm worried about. Do you agree? Are you seeing things from your bird's eye view or from an institutional perspective that I didn't even think of? And then we work it out. And one thing I love about this job is that I feel like that process works, and I've been very impressed. Sometimes I've filed pictures from a situation that I was like, "Whoa, that was complicated. I'm not even sure what the right thing is." And every time I feel like, with very few exceptions, the publications are coming back and doing the safest and most respectful thing possible. Again, maybe twice in my career, I really had to get in a fight about like, no, I filed this one image 6 months ago, and this kid is coming to me now and saying that like it's gonna, put his life at risk or something. That's like a real example, and maybe people weren't hearing me until I had to be like, we could get somebody hurt, and then okay, it clicks and that's it, But I've almost never had to like really take such a hard stance like that.
Well, it's good to hear that the majority of cases are pretty, agreed upon.
Yeah,
Limitations and stuff.
what you do have to do, and what doesn't happen, I think, without us on the ground, and what the huge responsibility that comes with doing this work and being the person who's on the ground, it's more so than even, writers or other types of journalists. Like a documentary photographer is a person who is like face to face with the people all the time. You're not sitting in a hotel room writing, right? You're in the street. And that means that you do have to, I think a lot of people are shy. They don't want to bother their editors. They're worried that they're going to sound like they don't, everybody has imposter syndrome, myself included. So people are worried that if they, make that phone call and say, I'm worried about this, then maybe they're going to sound unprofessional. When the reality is the opposite, right? It sounds very professional to be like, I saw this on the street. This is something we need to go over. I'm informing you. You really want to give all that information. You never want to file a photograph that you think could be potentially problematic and not want to rock the boat and just send it and then have somebody publish it and they didn't even realize the potential issues that you saw because you didn't want to bother anybody, right? So you need to communicate. You always want to ask all your questions, even if you're worried they're going to sound dumb. It's better to ask a dumb question than like cause a problem. And that's, I think, where our responsibilities come in. And then you do have to be prepared that in the event that things get really hairy, that you know what you stand for, that you know what you're willing to publish with your name on it and what consequences you're going to cause or not. And that's, I think, an ethical line that everybody needs to be considering, especially if you're working in very intense situations.
How closely are you working with writers in situations like that? So since you are the person that's like in the field, I assume that you have like a close relationship with the writer for that specific situation, and they're asking you questions and talking about what happened and stuff like that. Or if you're getting sent on assignment, I assume there's times where you actually already have like a written piece that's going to be published and you're shooting images to correlate with the actual story.
Yeah. Um, it's a total mixed bag. A lot of my assignments, there's a story written or a reporter who's already done the reporting and they're not there, and I'm being sent to either meet with people they've already interviewed or been working with or spoken to on the phone, or illustrate an article that's already been written, and I just need to make photographs that correspond. Some publications want very literal, like we want a picture of this person doing this thing because that's what the article is about. Some people want like a vibe, a picture of a town, a picture of an event or something, and it's gonna, go with it, but not be like a literal storyboard of that article. A lot of times I go out with a photographer and we're meeting people and they're interviewing and I'm photographing and we're sort of tag teaming back and forth. And did you see that? I'm going to go over there. You should meet this person. Oh, okay. Just, that's great. That's very collaborative, but still loose. Um, you know, sometimes a lot of my own projects and stories that I pitch, I write myself because either one, because I'm a control freak, and two, because a lot of the stories that I'm writing are very, like, I might be the only person there. It might not be realistic to get them to send somebody else, and I'm, literate enough for a photographer to do it. Or sometimes somebody will get assigned to write something that I've been photographing or a long-term project, and then I'm like feeding them interviews and introducing them to people and bringing them around. So it's a total mixed bag. I mean, my favorite thing is when I get to be in the field with a great journalist and we can, sort of be building off of each other and both sort of in our lanes, but like, passing back information and inspiration and having, a gut check and a different perspective and making something better than I can make by myself or they can. I've learned a lot about, interviewing and writing and doing good journalism from writers I've been in the field with. But a lot of times you're out there solo too.
Well, that concludes our 5 tips for storytelling, which I think were amazing. Is there anything else that you want to add before we give a quick little goodbye to all of our viewers?
I mean, wow, no, I feel like we just covered so much stuff. Hey, shameless plug. If you're vibing with this, if you're interested in learning more, please consider signing up for our workshops. You can find all of our information on our socials. I'm at Natalie Keyssar. Danny's at D's Altman, and I'm sure things will be,
I'll leave all the links to all the fun stuff as part of the video.
any questions. I hate DMs, and I will almost never answer them except if they're about the workshops, and then I totally will. But also, if you email me, better, even better. But feel free to holler at me about the workshops and
Yeah.
Probably nothing else.
And keep an eye out because we are also going to continue this conversation. Instead of talking about like storytelling and things like that, we're actually going to dive a little bit deeper into the business aspect. So she talked about, pitching and all of that fun stuff. And so we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into that in the next video. So hopefully you guys found this useful, and we'll catch you on the next one. See you guys.
Thank you so much.